The wind cut through the trees like sharpened whispers as Langston Ridge High emerged at the top of the hill. 3 stories of stone, glass, and silent judgment. Morning fog still clung to the soccer field like forgotten secrets, and the parking lot buzzed with Teslas, Mustangs, and the kind of laughter that always carried a hint of cruelty. Out front, Bus 14 hissed to a stop, its rusted door yawning open, and from it stepped a girl wrapped in an oversized hoodie, her dark eyes scanning the campus through thick lashes. Serenity Carter, 17, Atlanta-born, hoodie drawn tight against the chill, and the gazes already locking onto her like heat-seeking missiles. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She just adjusted her backpack and walked into a battlefield disguised as a school. The air smelled like designer perfume, asphalt, and fresh-cut grass. Too clean, to be honest. Inside, the marble halls gleamed, lined with banners boasting championships and Ivy League acceptances. Phones tilted toward her. Whispers crawled across lockers. A new girl always stirred the hive, but this one, black, silent, unreadable, was a disruption. What they didn't know, Serenity wasn't here to impress, to be liked, or to play anyone's game. She had one mission: survive senior year without being seen. But fate doesn't let people like Serenity go unnoticed for long. Somewhere across the quad, Charlotte Bellamy, the queen of Langston Ridge, flipped her perfect hair and locked eyes on the girl in the hoodie. A slow, wicked smile curved her lips. "Fresh meat," she whispered to no one in particular. And just like that, the fuse was lit. Serenity could already feel it, the atmosphere tightening around her like a noose, the silence before a storm. She didn't want trouble, didn't want eyes, didn't want to revisit the girl she used to be. But as the heavy doors slammed shut behind her and the halls swallowed her whole, she sensed the truth. This school didn't want her to disappear. It wanted to test her limits, and it had no idea who it was provoking. Serenity Carter's sneakers made no sound as she moved through the gleaming corridors of Langston Ridge High, but her presence rippled like a disturbance in still water. The hallway pulsed with morning energy. Metal lockers slammed shut, laughter bounced off stone walls, and the scent of hairspray, cologne, and cafeteria waffles lingered like fog. Students drifted in perfectly curated clusters, all pressed uniforms and practiced smiles. Serenity kept her hood up, her gaze low, skimming over the polished marble floor, as if trying not to leave footprints. Every muscle in her body was wound tight, not with fear, but with a familiar kind of vigilance. She'd done this dance before. New school, new stairs, same silent judgments. But Langston Ridge felt different, sharper, hungrier, her shoulders tensed. Something about this place whispered, "This isn't just school, it's a stage, and everyone already knows their roles, except you." At the far end of the hallway, lockers parted like a curtain as Charlotte Bellamy stepped into frame. Blonde hair curled in deliberate waves, icy eyes scanning the crowd like royalty inspecting peasants. 18, effortlessly magnetic and terrifying in the way only someone raised to never lose could be. Her designer shoes tapped like a metronome, rhythmic, rehearsed, commanding. On either side, her lieutenants, Talia, all red lips and sharper whispers, and Marin, quiet but calculating, cataloging every detail like a social scientist in stilettos. Together, they ruled this school not through violence, but with something colder: social precision, manipulation, psychological dissection. Charlotte's gaze landed on Serenity like a knife tip. No smirk, no words, just a slight head tilt, a flicker of interest, and the kind of silence that screams. Behind them, the final piece of the puzzle swaggered through the gym doors. Dax Bellamy, Charlotte's older brother. Broad-shouldered, varsity jacket gleaming, his smile the kind that made teachers bend rules and girls lose sense. He bumped shoulders with freshmen on purpose, laughed too loud, knew exactly how untouchable he was. Serenity clocked him instantly. Same species, different battlefield. She had no intention of stepping into their spotlight, but Charlotte's glance said otherwise. Serenity knew predators when she saw them, and this wasn't just curiosity, it was selection. Charlotte hadn't just noticed her, she'd chosen her. Serenity's heart didn't race, her breath didn't catch, But deep inside, a familiar pressure stirred. Not fear, calculation. Stay invisible. Don't react. You promised her never again. But the ground beneath Langston Ridge wasn't built for quiet exits, and Serenity could already feel the floor shifting. The first strike came wrapped in laughter. It was subtle, almost elegant, the way Charlotte orchestrated it. A whisper in the locker room, a well-timed nudge during gym warm-ups. A spilled bottle of water just before Serenity walked by, soaking her shoes and drawing muffled giggles from a semi-circle of onlookers, pretending not to watch. Serenity didn't flinch. She simply stepped aside, wiped her soles on the mat, and kept moving like the wind brushing past steel. But the air had changed. She could feel it. The way the hallway conversations dipped when she approached. The way her locker was suddenly jammed every other morning. How the fake Instagram account using her photo somehow knew her old nickname from Atlanta. It wasn't random. It was surgical. And Charlotte Bellamy was the scalpel. At lunch, Serenity sat alone near the quad's edge, where a single oak tree cast long shadows over the grass. Her food untouched, her headphones in, though the music was off. Eyes scanning, always scanning. Charlotte, meanwhile, held court in the center of the courtyard, like a monarch presiding over her empire. Every laugh, every glance was timed, calculated. Her fingers fluttered over her phone, sending out commands with practiced grace. One emoji and a wave of rumors would ripple through the school like wildfire. And today's message was clear. The new girl needed to be broken. The tension crept higher. In biology class, Serenity opened her notebook to find a sketch. Charcoal dark, eyes exaggerated, lips twisted, a caricature of her face with the words, "Bored already?" scribbled underneath. The class laughed. Even the teacher gave a bemused glance before moving on. Serenity stared at the image, expression blank, but her knuckles whitened as she turned the page without tearing it. Charlotte watched from 3 rows back, her smile thin, eyes sharp. For her, it wasn't about anger. It was about cracking the surface. Because Serenity's silence wasn't submission. It was a dare. And Charlotte didn't lose dares. But what Serenity hadn't calculated, what she refused to admit, was that maybe, just maybe, she'd underestimated how far Charlotte would go. Because when Dax brushed past her in the hall with a sneer and muttered, "Little mouse," she froze. Not from fear, but from recognition. The way he looked at her, it was the same look someone once gave her in Atlanta, right before everything collapsed. Serenity swallowed hard. Maybe this wasn't just high school power games. Maybe she wasn't just being watched. She was being hunted. And this time, there were more wolves than she'd counted. It began as a ripple, small, ignorable. Serenity noticed it in the way conversations died the moment she passed, how faces turned too quickly, how desks shifted just slightly away from hers in class. At first, she chalked it up to the usual new kid silence, the standoffish nature of elite cliques testing boundaries. But there was something colder threading through the air now, something invisible but undeniable. In the cafeteria, she caught whispers trailing behind her like smoke. Words she couldn't hear, but could feel. At first it was curiosity, then it was mockery. Now it was something else, something calculated. One afternoon, she opened her locker to find a single note. No handwriting, just a printed message. "We see everything." A chill ran down her spine, not from the words, but from the implication. They weren't guessing who she was. They knew. Serenity folded the note slowly, careful not to let her hands shake, then looked over her shoulder. No one stared directly, but too many eyes flinched when she met them. Too many knew something she didn't. Later that day in history class, Charlotte passed a note across 3 desks with the ease of a practiced conductor. It slid onto Serenity's desk like a playing card, face down, waiting. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she stared at it for several long seconds, heart ticking louder than the second hand on the classroom clock. Then she unfolded it. Inside, a screenshot of an old fight, grainy but clear. A girl, her, pinning another to the ground in a gym in Atlanta. Serenity's breath caught. Her ears rang. She hadn't seen that footage since she made the promise. Never again. Never violence. Never that girl. The photo had been buried, sealed by lawyers, forgotten by everyone, except Charlotte. Serenity crumpled the paper, shoved it in her bag, and kept her eyes forward, even as her chest tightened. That's when she understood. This wasn't random bullying. Charlotte had dug. This was targeted, intentional. And now Serenity's silence wasn't armor anymore. It was a ticking clock. That night, Serenity sat in her room, the light from her phone screen casting sharp shadows on the walls. Her fingers hovered over her messages, debating whether to call her father. But what could she say? That she was unraveling? That she'd been found? Instead, she locked the phone, pulled her hoodie tight around her shoulders, and sat in the dark. She thought silence would protect her, but now she realized silence might have only made her a better target. Charlotte didn't just want to humiliate her. She wanted to expose her, to make Serenity reveal the part she had worked so hard to bury. The power had shifted, the game had changed, and Serenity knew for the first time since she stepped onto campus that the war had already begun. Quiet, invisible, and dangerously precise. The courtyard was too quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as Serenity stepped into the open space behind the gym, where shadows stretched long beneath the dying afternoon sun. A half-circle of students had already formed, phones raised like modern-day torches, anticipation thick in the air. At the center stood Charlotte, flanked by Dax and a few others, her arms crossed, eyes narrowed, lips curling into a smirk that said she'd already won. Serenity walked forward slowly, her breath steady but shallow. Each step felt heavier than the last. She hadn't planned to come, but some invisible thread had pulled her here. A confrontation was inevitable now, and somewhere deep down, she'd known it all along. Charlotte's voice sliced through the silence like a scalpel. "Thought you'd run. Glad you're not as much of a coward as you look." The crowd chuckled, a nervous, unsure sound. Serenity didn't respond. She looked at Charlotte, not with fear, but with clarity. She could feel it now, the shift. This wasn't about intimidation anymore. This was a performance. Charlotte had staged this moment like a finale, expecting Serenity to crumble. But as Serenity scanned the crowd, something clicked. These weren't warriors. They were spectators, watching, waiting, hoping for blood. Then Charlotte made her move. With a nod to Dax, the boy stepped forward, big and smug, his steps heavy on the pavement. "Let's see what you're really made of, ghost girl." He lunged, fast, clumsy, predictable. Serenity didn't hesitate, not this time. Her body moved before her mind caught up, reflexes honed from years of buried discipline snapping into action. She sidestepped cleanly, grabbed his wrist, twisted, and used his own momentum to flip him hard onto the ground. The crowd gasped. Dax groaned, stunned and winded, staring up at the sky in disbelief. The silence shattered. Gasps, screams, phones recording in shaky hands. Charlotte's face drained of color, her smirk collapsing into something raw. Rage, fear, maybe both. She took a single step back, just one, but it was enough. Serenity met her gaze, calm and unblinking. "You wanted the truth? Here it is." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Every word hit like a drumbeat. Charlotte's lips parted, but no words came. Behind her, even her loyal lieutenants looked uncertain now, exchanging glances that cracked the foundation of her power. And Serenity? She didn't gloat, didn't smile. She just stood there, strong, silent, unafraid. The secret she'd tried to bury was out now, exposed under the full glare of 100 camera phones and even more stunned stares. But she no longer felt cornered. She felt seen. The truth didn't destroy her. It had freed her. But as the adrenaline faded and the crowd began to buzz louder, a deeper question settled in her chest. What comes next now that there's no more hiding? The whispers didn't stop after the fight. They only changed direction. Now they weren't asking, "Who is she?" but "Did you see what she did?" By Monday morning, Serenity's name was on every tongue, but the tone had shifted. No longer mockery, not quite admiration. It was something closer to awe and unease. She walked through the front doors of Langston Ridge High with her hood down for the first time. No need to hide anymore. But even as her shoulders squared and her gaze stayed level, Serenity knew she hadn't won anything yet. Not really. The truth was out, yes, but freedom came with weight. Charlotte hadn't returned to school that morning. Word was her parents had pulled her out temporarily, citing emotional distress. Some students defended her, others distanced themselves with lightning speed. Her inner circle scattered. Dax avoided eye contact. Marin transferred lunch tables. Talia barely looked up from her phone when Serenity passed by. The social empire Charlotte had ruled crumbled quietly, not in dramatic collapse, but in whispered apologies and silences too long to repair. But Serenity didn't celebrate. She couldn't. There was no joy in tearing someone down, even someone who tried so hard to break her. All she felt was a dull ache, a tiredness that settled in her bones like winter. The girl she'd fought to bury had risen again, not in rage, but in precision, controlled, strategic, but still, it was violence. She hadn't wanted it, and even if the world applauded, Serenity couldn't pretend it didn't cost her something. After school, she found herself back at the gym, the old one tucked behind her neighborhood grocery store. The place still smelled like sweat and linoleum, and the echoes of punches on leather rang like distant memories. Her father stood in the far corner, wrapping his hands with slow, deliberate movements. He didn't ask why she came. He just nodded, as if he'd been waiting. "I didn't lose control," Serenity said quietly, breaking the silence. "But it still felt like I failed." He looked at her, his eyes warm but unreadable. "Control isn't about avoiding conflict," he said. "It's about choosing when to end it. You didn't fail, Serenity. You chose. That matters." "But I hurt people," she whispered, "even if they deserved it. I didn't want to be that person again." Her father stepped closer, placing a wrapped hand on her shoulder. "You didn't become someone else. You returned to who you are, someone who protects herself with discipline, not anger, not vengeance. That's what your mother taught you." Tears welled, but Serenity blinked them back. This wasn't the end of the story, it was a reckoning. Her redemption wasn't a clean, cinematic triumph. It was a reckoning with who she'd been and who she'd become. And she knew now it would take time to build trust, to redefine herself not through fear or silence, but through strength and choice. The next morning at school, she walked past the lunch tables, past the curious eyes, and stopped when she saw someone sitting alone. Iris Monroe, the quiet girl who had always offered her a smile when no one else did. Serenity hesitated, then sat across from her without a word. Iris glanced up, startled, then slowly smiled. No one gasped. No music swelled. But in that moment, something shifted again. Smaller this time. Softer. Real. Because redemption, Serenity realized, didn't come from fighting back. It came from choosing, again and again, to show up anyway. The video hit the internet like a tidal wave. Within hours, it was everywhere. On student group chats, local news feeds, even national trending hashtags. During Serenity Stood Up, Strength in Silence, Rasha, Langston Reckoning. The footage was raw, shaky, but undeniable. Serenity Carter, calm and composed, taking down the school's golden boy with grace, disarming her enemies, not just with technique, but with restraint. It wasn't just the physical moves that captured people. It was the silence before the storm, the way she stood after, the look she gave Charlotte, not triumphant, not cruel, but final. It was the look of someone who didn't need to win to prove power. She only needed to endure. Across the country, students shared their own stories of bullying, of silence, of trying to survive. Serenity had become more than a girl in a hoodie. She was a symbol, a challenge to those who thought intimidation was strength. And at Langston Ridge, the ripple effect was immediate. Teachers began paying closer attention to the whispers in their classrooms. Hallway graffiti vanished overnight. Clubs formed with names like Silent Strength and Stand Tall. The school didn't change completely, but it was no longer the same. Charlotte returned weeks later, quieter, changed. Not apologetic, not yet, but no longer the center of gravity she once was. She walked the halls alone now, a ghost of her former self, eyes cast low, the crown she built from cruelty cracked and discarded. People watched her, yes, but not with fear, with distance. Whatever power she'd once wielded, it was gone. And Serenity, she didn't seek revenge. She didn't post statements. She didn't take the spotlight. She simply lived. At lunch, she still sat with Iris, still wore her hoodie on bad days, still trained at night with her father, her strikes now softer, more deliberate. When asked how it felt to be the girl who fought back, she'd smile and say, "I didn't fight back. I stood my ground." And those who understood nodded, because that was the lesson. True power isn't about hitting harder. It's about knowing when not to. It's the strength to walk through fire and come out standing, not burned, but forged. And Serenity was forged in silence, in pain, in discipline. Her victory wasn't the takedown. It was the refusal to become what tried to destroy her. So now we ask you, what would you have done in Serenity's shoes? Would you have stayed silent, fought back, or found the strength to endure, waiting for the right moment to rise? If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of someone who's faced their own battles in silence, don't let it end here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the X Daily Stories channel, where real power lives in unexpected places, and every week we bring you stories that challenge the rules, stir your soul, and remind you that behind every quiet face, there's a storm waiting to rise. This is X Daily Stories, and this is just the beginning.